Well, hello there, everyone. Welcome back to Family Care Navigators. I am Bill, here with my co-host Stephanie, and we have a very heavy topic for today, one that's truly hard to talk about, but oh so important. It's when the caregiver becomes an abuser. I know this sounds jarring, but it's something that many caregivers experience, and even though they might not always recognize it.
Yes, everyone. Thanks for joining us. And it's true, Bill. Caregiving is something we usually associate with love and patience and kindness and selflessness. But the reality is that caregiving can be overwhelming, and sometimes the burden leads to something darker, rage. And today we're not just talking about how rage affects the caregiver, but how it impacts the person receiving the care.
Oh, that is so true. And, not everyone's perfect, and we all have those breaking points. Mm-hmm. Especially when we're under constant stress. In fact, we've received so many messages from caregivers sharing that moment when they just snapped, when their patience ran out and they didn't know how to deal with the anger that came flooding in. That's why this conversation, it is vitally necessary, because rage doesn't just hurt the caregiver, it also hurts the person they're caregiving for.
Exactly. And here's the hard truth. When we talk about caregiving rage, it's not just a one-time outburst. It's a gradual buildup. And that's what I think people don't understand. It is frustration, exhaustion, the feeling of being trapped. And it doesn't just hurt emotionally. It can also be physically dangerous. And that's something people don't realize. But before we dive into the signs and the causes of caregiving rage, let's start with a story.
Yeah, we got a story from a listener named Jessica. She wrote us about the emotional exhaustion of caregiving for her father. And unfortunately, he's been battling Alzheimer's for years. And Jessica was doing everything, managing the medications, booking appointments, making meals, but yet still trying to juggle her own life. And one day her father was particularly agitated, and Jessica just lost it. She lost her cool. She snapped and yelled at him, something she never thought she would do. That moment has haunted her, and she felt like life was just a simple failure.
Yeah, and Jessica's story is not uncommon, right? This happens more often than what people realize, and it's heartbreaking. And the reality is that caregivers are often pushed to their limits. And when that stress doesn't get addressed, it can turn into something dangerous like caregiver rage. And what exactly does that rage look like? Well, how do you recognize the signs, and what should you watch for in both yourself and the person that you're caring for? I remember at one point in time, we had my mom living with us, and then our grandchildren were here all the time. And we had a grandchild that was particularly hard to put to sleep for his naps. And the other grandchild, he didn't want to lay down while the other brother was laying down. And, I just snapped. I just completely snapped. And it wasn't because I didn't love them. It wasn't because I didn't care. It was that I was at my limit. And thankfully, my daughter-in-law, with very much grace, at first it was confrontational, but then with a lot of grace, she was like, you know what? I recognize what's happening here, and you need a break. Mm-hmm. And it was very difficult. It was a very difficult situation, and I carried a lot of guilt and a lot of shame with that. And, it's hard. I don't care who you are. So I understand this whole caregiver rage situation.
Yeah, so why don't we take a look at the caregiver itself? First sign of rage is often physical tension, like you talked about. Your body's going to start to tell you when you're at your breaking point. You might feel that tightness in your shoulders, a clenched jaw, or even your hands turning to a fist, and you feel just so overwhelmed. And those tight, uncomfortable sensations are your body signaling that stress is building up and it's time to do something about it.
Absolutely. And then there's the shortness of the temper, which is really where I was. And you might find yourself snapping at the person that you're caring for over something small. Just insignificant, something that usually wouldn't even bother you. But that's the little things. And like your loved one asking the same question for the 10th time. Listen, people who are caring for those with Alzheimer's, this is a real issue. It can just be overwhelming, or not being able to remember something important. and that will set you off.
Yeah.
And you start feeling like you're losing patience, and your frustration, it builds quickly.
Yeah, it does. And, it's not just about the big outburst either. Sometimes it's that silent rage.
Yeah.
Yeah, that silent rage, that simmering anger that you hold in because you don't want to show it, but it's eating at you. It's just inside of you going, "Urgh," and it just feels, and it's like maybe you feel that resentment, especially if you've been caregiving for months or even years without much relief. It's normal to be frustrated, but when your frustration turns to resentment, it is that red flag that you need to get some assistance and get some help.
And one thing I really want to highlight here is self-blame. And I think that's a big one for caregivers, right? When you feel you start that feeling of rage or resentment and you start asking themselves, why can't I handle this? I remember many, many days I would say to myself, why in the world is this bothering me? On a normal basis, this would not bother me. Why am I acting like this? Why is this troubling me so much? And, you feel like a failure, and the guilt and the anger, it just makes it worse. Guilt plagues on anger, and then anger plagues on guilt. And it's this terrible, vicious cycle. And it's an internal struggle of being angry at yourself and being angry at someone you love. And honestly, you guys, it's exhausting, but it happens all the time.
Yeah, and sometimes the rage is more than just emotional. It can turn into that verbal aggression. Maybe you find yourself raising your voice more than you should, or even insulting or belittling the person you're caring for. Yeah, I mean, those emotions just runs. You're like, okay, I've said it enough. You start raising your voice, and you're like, or you just like, oh, that internal struggle. Like, oh, okay. And, and once you say those harsh words, they can't be taken back. And they can hurt both you and your loved one very deeply.
That's exactly right. In the story that I told earlier about caring for everyone, that's what happened is I snapped with our oldest grandson, and it really wasn't even at him, but my words became just ugly. And it was like, what? I would never on a normal basis say those things. I would never have snapped. I would have never been insulting or degrading or mean in any way, because anybody who knows me knows that I adore my grandchildren, right?
Oh, yeah.
But it was just a matter of I hadn't really recognized the signs of caregiver rage. I had not recognized the signs of exhaustion. I had not recognized the signs of frustration and anger. And instead of not paying attention to that, and setting some boundaries and saying no when I needed to say no and yes when I needed to say yes, I just let it boil up like a pressure cooker. And, your words can just become so ugly and so harsh. And your words, like Bill said earlier, they can't be taken back.
No.
Once you say them, they're out there. And that causes hurt and pain. So you have to really be careful. And it's important to see these signs early. You really do have to be aware of them, because when you're aware, then you can take steps to correct them. And recognizing those feelings and reaching out for support can prevent them from turning into something just really more harmful.
Yeah, and you think about it, if you're somebody that you have a 9-to-5 job and your caregiver is at home as well, or I should say the person caregiving for that family member is at home by themselves taking care of that. When you come home, sometimes they just have to vent, and you have to be able to listen, listen, and take it in. Don't try to solve it, but just let them vent. I mean, because I did that a lot. I mean, I tried to solve stuff, and you said, I don't want you to solve it. I want you just to listen.
Yeah.
I'm like, you're right. So it took me a little while. It will take you a little while to realize it.
Well, because men are fixers, right?
True.
You just want to solve the problem. That's the nature of a man. When, especially, you love me well, and you always want to make sure that I don't have difficulty and stress and all of that. And so that would be your solution, is you would try to give me a solution for it. It's like, no.
Yeah.
I just need to vent.
Just need to vent.
Yeah.
So let's switch gears right now and talk about what we're going to look for in your loved ones. And on the receiving end of that caregiver rage. One of the first signs is fear or anxiety. And if your loved one seems fearful when you enter the room or they avoid eye contact, I mean, that should be a telltale sign right there. They're picking up on your emotional state. They're picking up on how you're feeling. And don't think, it's like the spidey sense, you like to say. They have that spidey sense when they know that something's wrong. And yeah.
Yeah. I mean, caregivers often don't realize it, but your loved one, they pick up on your tension and they start to withdraw from you or become more agitated themselves. That's really a telltale sign. It's kind of like this sounds funny, but animals know when you're scared. Animals know when you're frustrated. Animals know when you need attention. And honestly, you guys, someone that you're caring for, they sense that. They know that because they feel the stress and the anger coming from you. And sometimes your loved one might even start to show signs of like confusion or disorientation where they weren't before. And you should pay attention to that because it could be a response to the emotional turmoil that's happening around them.
Yeah, and other signs to look for is increased physical symptoms in your loved one. They might I know we've seen folks that complain more about their pain or seem to be less responsive in care. Stress and emotional tension can manifest physically in the person you're caring for. And while this could be also related to the illness, it's worth paying attention to when their physical symptoms seem to increase alongside your own emotional outbursts.
Well, I remember even with your mom, because she suffered from such severe depression, we had to pay real close attention to her responses and begin to read them. And she would know when we were upset. My mom would know when we were upset. And you could recognize that difference in their personality. You could recognize the difference in their wording and their connection. And sometimes the person that you're caring for begins to feel disconnected, right? And so it's like they're just going through the motions. And you as the caregiver, sometimes you feel disconnected and you're just going through the motions. You've got to do A, B, and C. You have a routine. So therefore there's no emotional connection. And that's a dangerous place to get to. And when that person receiving care gets connected as well, that's, listen, you're at the end of the rope right there.
Yeah.
You need to truly, truly pay attention. And you might notice that they are completely withdrawn. Listen, wake up. That is a red flag.
Yeah, because, when the caregiver feels emotionally exhausted, their loved one feels it too, like you were talking about. And what can happen is that emotional withdrawal on both sides. It's not just a one-sided venture. It's at both sides. And it's important to stay engaged with your loved one, and not just physically, but emotionally. Even when you're tired or better yet, frustrated.
Yes.
Yeah. So why don't we talk about the role of faith in healing right now, Stephanie?
Well, we can definitely do that. I love that aspect of it. We've talked about the real heavy side of caregiving, right? And it's a topic that most people are not willing to discuss. We've talked about the stress and the aggravation and the agitation and the exhaustion and the anger. But here's something that we want to bring hope into this conversation. Because if you know Bill and I at all, and you've listened for any length of time, you know that we are people of faith. And we believe that our faith can really be a source of strength.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes you just need to stop and let God's presence fill you. And there's a verse in Isaiah 41:10 that says, "Do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand."
I love that passage of scripture. Our daughter-in-law's mother wrote a song about that. And
That's true.
It's a powerful passage of scripture. Yeah. And when you take that in and you really begin to realize he is upholding you with his righteous right hand, when you begin to realize that God is carrying you, that he sees your burden, he understands it, And sometimes it just takes that quiet moment of prayer, even if it's just 5 minutes, to breathe and to ask for his strength.
Yeah, and I think we most of all need to remember that it's not about being perfect.
No.
God doesn't expect you to carry the weight of caregiving on your own. He wants you to help he wants to help lighten that load, and that means reaching out, whether it's for counseling, support groups, or leaning into your faith community. Faith isn't just about prayer; it's about action too. And take that step to get help when you need it.
Listen, I tell everybody, I am the practical one. Like I'm a woman of faith, and I believe in the spiritual side of things, and I believe in what the word says, and I believe that you can dig in to that spirit realm, right? But I also believe that it is a matter of practicality, that he has put us here on the earth in order that we would utilize the practical things, the things that are here on the earth for us to utilize, right? And so there are resources, there are things available, and there are practical steps to deal with this rage. Whatever the root of your rage is, because see, what happens is most of the time is that the rage that you express outwardly when you are caregiving, there's a much deeper root to it. And I'm all about getting to the root of things. I'm all about digging way down and let's find out what is actually happening. Because I believe that when you dig up the root, you're going to destroy the tree, right? When you dig up the root, you destroy the tree.
Yeah.
And so if you are seeing rage, if you are seeing difficulty in caregiving, if you're seeing all that, there's something much deeper inside of you that needs to be handled. Maybe there's a fear. Maybe there is resentment. Maybe there is a sense of abandonment. I don't know what it is. Whatever it is, it really and truly needs to be dealt with. And so there are some practical things that you can do. So if you find yourself struggling with caregiver rage, first and foremost, you have to recognize it early. You don't want it turning into something ugly.
Right.
You don't want it to destroy you or your loved one. And so if you're feeling tense or angry or disconnected, take a step back and ask yourself what is really going on. Don't ignore the warning signs. Listen, so many times people won't acknowledge the warning signs. They're afraid.
Right.
And you can't be afraid to acknowledge them. There's nothing wrong with acknowledging the warning signs.
That's very true. I mean, you need to talk about it. And if you're comfortable, open up to someone, like you said, maybe a friend. I mean, friends are always there saying, hey, if you need me, just bounce some stuff off of me. You're like, okay, here it comes. I hope you were ready when you truly meant that. And you're like, yeah. I'm like, or they'll tell you, no, I don't want to talk about that. They will tell you. So, and if a friend's not there, you can say, I can reach out to a therapist, because everybody's insurance covers therapy sessions.
Absolutely.
I mean, it covers mental and physical therapy sessions. So even talk about your pastor. If you're involved in a church there, talk with one of your pastors about it, because bottling it up, it's going to make it worse. And to be honest with yourself, caregiving is very hard. And like you said, it's okay to admit that you truly need a break from this. I need to get away, or I need even just an hour to reset.
And sometimes you're going to need more than an hour.
Right.
Like you might need an hour, but it might be that you have cared for someone for so long that you might have to start making some hard decisions, that maybe you're no longer able to be a caregiver.
Yes, we had to do that ourselves.
And that's a very difficult thing. But if you're honest with yourself, it makes life better for you and for the person that you're caring for. The truth of the matter is, you don't want to harm the person that you're caring for. But if you don't pay attention to the warning signs, you will.
Yeah.
And that's a horrible, horrible thing. So please, please, please do not be afraid to ask for help. Listen, you can reach out to Bill and I. Our number is on our website, familycarenavigators.com. You can email us. You can reach out to us. We want to help you. We do not want to see you not ask for help. There is help available. And caregiver rage is real. We have seen it. We have experienced it. And listen, if you have done this for any length of time, you have experienced it, whether you're willing to admit it or not.
Sure.
And so please, 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 it's not selfish. It's necessary.
Yeah, it's very necessary. And we know that today this has been a very heavy conversation, but we hope it's also one that can bring healing. And caregiver rage isn't something to be ashamed of. It's something that can be prevented with awareness, self-care, and support. And remember, God is right there with you, offering his strength.
So remember, don't wait until it gets worse. Go ahead and reach out. You're not alone in this.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to wrap it up today, and we'll see you next time on Family Care Navigators. So subscribe, comment, and like our podcast. Visit our website at familycarenavigators.com for resources, helpful tips, and the way to get in touch with us if you're in need of something and someone to talk about during your caregiving journey.
Not only that, but there's also a devotional on our blog about caregiving rage and how to overcome.